Hello, everyone. This is Molly from the Casually Molly podcast, and I just wanted to introduce you to my new friends at the Natty Cat. This one is for all you cool cats and kittens who can't get enough of wordplay and fur babies. The Natty Cat's natural soy candles feature inventive scent combinations in glass jars with clever kitties on the labels. The scent of furry sweater weather takes holiday candles to a new level with a blend of eucalyptus, mint, and pine, and a slightly disgruntled Persian sporting a red sweater. Because who doesn't want to dress up their cat? The Smoke and Puss features 007's cat counterpart, along with the flavors of orange blossom, cedar, and incense. Hand purred with locally sourced natural soy wax, the Natty Cat's candles, wood wicks, create a cozy fireside crackling sound, perfect for curling up on the couch. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember to stay safe and look at the Natty Cat on Facebook and Instagram.
Have you ever wanted to get your shit together? Scrap it, look through the lens and capture it. But first world problems are getting you down. Disabled, salty, need a laugh to fix that frown. Well, you can do all those things and so much more. Just grab a seat in the chair or the floor. Sit back, relax, recline. Well, she drops another casual line. You're tuned into Casually Molly with Molly and Bergie.
All right, welcome back to the Casually Molly podcast. This is Molly, and I'm sitting with a good friend of mine, podcast extraordinaire, co-owner, co-founder of Midcoast Media. Which one are we going with? What title?
It's your show, Molly. Take the reins.
I like it. Let's take it. We'll do, I think that with Tina Deball, we said you were a co-owner. So let's go with the fancy title.
I always say co-founder because it's just,
I like that.
It's whatever. Yeah. But yes,
it's whatever.
Midcoast Media and We Are Live. Yep. Thanks.
And We Are
Appreciate
Live.
it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Appreciate it. We're on to a really good start. But yeah, happy Friday, Chris. How are you doing? I'm sorry that I'm not with you in person right now.
I know you're a quarter mile away and it feels like much more distance. But yes.
It's all right.
I'm okay. We can still, I can still work. People need virtual stuff. We're helping out a bunch of charities. That's cool. We're doing the social
what charities
distancing.
are you working on?
St. Louis Counseling Services, we always help them. They're a great mental health, service, and they're doing virtual sessions with people. So we're able to help them keep the word out. And then also we're working, our company's working with the Pool Holes Foundation. That's really cool, selling t-shirts, as well as the United States Bartenders Guild. We're donating a bunch of stuff. So if you buy this Support All Bartenders shirt, every bit of the proceeds goes to the USBG, which is the United States Bartenders Guild. And there's like 4 or 5 more, but you get the point.
I love that. Well, I think this is really important to have like people paying it forward during this time for sure. So casually paying it forward, Denman, I love it. But yeah.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
No, we have the capabilities and like there are still some semblances of business happening. And if you can kind of be online, like it's a weird feeling because it's almost like you feel guilty even being able to work. I don't know if you feel that at all as you stand alone in a hotel for 8 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have a weird, unique kind of setup, even though we lost a ton of business with our publicity and promotional side of what we do. We help some comics out on a like national scale, and then we have events and things like that. So it's weird, but we're recouping and kind of just positioning all the stuff we're doing. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, right. I feel like that's a theme of 2020. We'll see what happens. Like that's like
sure.
I'm like, please just take what's left of me. I started out so strong this year. Like I was so excited for January because I was like hosting for comics and like I was really feeling like I was getting on top of my game, and then everything was like shutting down. And you remember that. It was a very slow scale where it's like, all right, this event is canceled and like this is happening. But what I will attest to is that Chris has been pretty cool. You've had me on the Bootleggers Trivia Night, which was super fun. Had a great time with that.
You turned some heads at that. They loved you. Absolutely.
Oh, it was fun. Well, I actually love funny story, Denman. Look at this. And I didn't even realize this until I sat down at my desk. I have the pre-show notes. I'm such a nerd. I printed them out. And
Great
I'm
work.
like, oh, well, then the thing is, I'll look at these things. And then when trivia happens, like I just did a trivia thing with local comedian Rich Braun, and then Aaron Porter did it with us, and then Jamie Ward from World Series of Comedy. And the problem was that Aaron's only like 2 years behind me. I'm 29 going on 30. And Rich is like, what actress in like 1975? And we're just like, wait,
Who?
what?
Oh, back
So
when
at
they
least
made
I had
movies 4 hours long and and like the pacing. When's the last time you have you watched a movie from the 70s recently?
No, not at all. That's why I didn't.
Like
Somehow
Rocky,
I made it to the final round, though.
like Rocky was made in 1979 and won an Oscar, and it's like one of the best stories ever. Ugh, try and
Yeah.
watch it now. You're like, what has happened? Like, what is this snooze fest? It's crazy because I love
It's
that movie,
crazy.
and it's really just like a thing. But like, man, if you watch movies from the 60s, 70s, and I think that's what Tarantino was trying to do with the what is it? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The pacing
I
made it
just
really
watched
slow.
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was
Yeah.
weird. What did you think of that?
So that's it. So Jimmy and I watched it, and he is a big fan of Tarantino.
Same,
So
obsessed.
yeah, yes, exactly. And I, being in theater and film and doing that in college, I have an appreciation for it. And then Italian film is very similar in that regard because I took an Italian film class when I studied abroad, and Fellini did the same kind of thing with like these long, like abstract choices, and I told Jimmy, I was like, there's kind of I don't know if you kind of read the background of it, but it's loosely, or at least this article said it was kind of loosely based off of a actor and a stuntman that had a really close relationship together.
Mm-hmm.
And then I forget the name of the actress who was Margot Robbie in it, but in real life, she died.
Sharon Tate.
Exactly. Sharon Tate. There you go. See, I'm 29 coming out.
It's the Tate LaBianca murders and Charlie Manson and all that stuff. But it's it was really just the film itself. Like again, I'm obsessed with like Inglourious Bastards and obviously
I
all
love
the other
that movie.
So good.
Mm-hmm.
It was really weird because Leo and Brad Pitt are so good, and I love them. I felt like it was set up for everything for like to be made for me, and I was just like, I didn't feel it, and it's weird
Really?
because it was weird because I felt like I was that movie was tailored to be like, hey, white dude who's into all this stuff, like here you go, and I just was not. I wasn't that into it. I feel really.
And
weird
here's
about
the
that.
white girl who like literally would be like, no. And I like loved every second of it. I loved at the end because at first I was like, oh my God, there's going to be like murder and stuff. But when I won't give too much away for people who haven't seen it yet, but it was kind of great how Leonardo DiCaprio handled some things at the end with the blowtorch. And I was like, yeah. And of course, like the dog was great too. So I was like, of course, the dog's in this heroic role. But anytime I did a lot of like, I've seen a lot of shows about Charles Manson, and I did like different reports in him and stuff. And it's just kind of crazy how his themes and stuff come up on different things. And I don't know. I keep forgetting like how you didn't have that security like you do today, where you could just drive up to the Hollywood Hills and just see people, like it's kind of a crazy thing to think about.
And I'm no expert, so I'm not going to open up the wormhole, but now like there's a new book out and there's a bunch of studies and all this stuff that like it wasn't that maybe that random, and Charles Manson was there's so many ridiculous crazy things that are actually tied to it that are provable and whatever.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. We'll see. That's going to be our next episode. Tune in to when Chris Denman and I were We Are Live Charles Manson. The title.
No,
He's like,
horrible.
No, so horrible. I don't even want to think about it. But we've been watching a lot of movies, obviously, at quarantine. Is there one that you like the best that you've watched so far while you've been inside? Have you had time? I know you've been essentially working as well. So
I've been working like honestly like 14-hour days, like because I'll go home and then I'll make dinner and then I'm like, oh, I guess I can work some more. And we have some new business on the West Coast, and people on the West Coast that are busy are like, yeah, let's talk at 6. I'm like, that's 8.
Yeah,
That's 8
exactly.
o'clock, but you got to take the call. So not that much, but I did start a series. There's like a free Apple TV subscription, and what's the series? It's The Morning Show. Have you seen
I
that?
want to see that. Yes, I love Reese and obviously Jennifer Aniston. How do you like it?
It's fantastic. It's so good so
Good.
far. I'm only like halfway into it, but that's really good. And then I haven't really watched anything else like at all.
That's okay.
It's like, here's what I
Means you're
do.
being productive.
Yeah, I come in. I'm usually here at our office studio, like early. I mess with my dogs. I wake up, mess with my dogs, do all that stuff, get things ready, come in here, and then I spend like 10 to 12 hours here, and then I end up working when I get home. But what I'll do for any sort of just like zone out is just like I just flip on a podcast or some music and just stand around and stare into the abyss and cook slowly for 2 hours and then go to sleep.
Yeah, 100%. I listened to the WTF podcast with Mark Maron a bunch. I've been really binging on that, and I'm such a fan of him. And so that's why it was like a dream come true. When I saw him live in LA, it was a surprise. Like I didn't know he was going to be on the lineup, and they're like, Mark Maron is coming out. I was like, oh my God.
Was that at the Comedy Store or where'd you see him?
Yeah, it was at the Comedy Store. He's like, surprise, I'm here. And I was like, hi. He obviously didn't hear me, but I was just so excited. Like our whole table was like, she is obviously a fan. I just feel like he kind of understands how I feel about life and the way life works. So which is kind of crazy.
Do you have some rage deep inside that friendly posterior that you put out?
Exactly. Well, you know what's so funny? I feel like, being in comedy and being with like everybody that's in the scene here and theater and everything, like I'm always so happy to be doing something artistically that I like doing. Or when I come to the studio, when I used to be able to walk in, like before these times, like I was always so happy to be there on a Saturday morning because it's something that I like to do. So It's more for when I'm around people who like I know aren't doing something right, or I don't like the way they treat other people. Like my friends always joke, they were like, Mollie is a really nice person, but she's also the friend to call when you want to hide a body. They're like,
you're action oriented.
Like, yeah. Exactly. Like obviously, not going to pull a snap anytime soon here, but I always want to be there for people. And like, if that means sometimes I have to kind of pull out the big guns and do what I need to do and get to the right place morally, I guess, is where I'm going with this. But enough about me and my, morals and values system in quarantine. We could just talk about that all day. What I want to talk to you about is, you're speaking about all these different, business ventures you've got in different places with charities and the West Coast. And for those of you who don't know, Chris Denman you're from St. Louis, right?
No. Well, okay. Oh. So to somebody from Cincinnati.
Let's start from the beginning.
To somebody from Cincinnati, like you'd be like, you might as well. But like I straight up like grew up, like I got thrown off a horse like 3 times before I was like 6 years old. So like wow. I grew up, I lived in Cape Girardeau, Missouri until I was like right before kindergarten started. And then I moved to Farmington, Missouri, which is an hour south of St. Louis. You've done some shows there and everything. So Farmington's grown quite a bit, which believe it or not, like it's over like 20,000 people now or something. But when I first moved there, it was probably half the size. And like the Super Walmart was just getting built in like 1989 and all that stuff. But yeah, I started kindergarten there. But I don't know, I had family in St. Louis, and it's an hour away. I've lived in the city of St. Louis for about, I guess, 9 years total. And then like in Kansas, we can go through it, but Kansas City for a couple of years and all that good stuff. But I grew up in Farmington, Missouri, like literally like with like 8 dogs and 10 horses and all that good stuff. So yeah, pretty lucky, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love dogs. I used to ride horses, so I got thrown off a couple of horses in my day as well. And you just got to get right back on.
I'm older than you. I mean, but like I feel like the difference between like mine and your like growing ups to like now, I'm like, would someone call Child Protective Services if they saw like 6-year-old me getting rocketed off a full-size horse and like landing on my head? Like that happened. Like
right, exactly.
My parents were amazing, still are, and I'm like, Would that fly today? I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. I think maybe it could spell trouble. But yeah, I grew up an hour
It
south.
explains so much. It's okay. Don't worry
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's cool. I know, right? Well, what I will say, we've both been thrown on the head, which is probably how we ended up doing podcasting and all these things, right?
Well,
like,
it
but
affects impulsive decision making, and that probably started my trail down the old CTE lane too. So yeah.
yeah, exactly. What I want to hear from you is, for me, you kind of know my background. I went to SLU, I was in theater and dance, and then I studied journalism in college. And it wasn't until I started really, when I moved back here, being originally from Cincinnati, I was like, maybe I'll try this and kind of see where it goes. But what I really admire about you, and not just because we're standing here looking at each other, with
Sure.
no turning back now.
I'll cut the feed if you're not nice.
Exactly right. I'll be like, let me talk about what I really want to talk about. But no, this isn't a tell-all. The point is that what I really admire. Oh man, we've been in quarantine for too long.
Yeah, right. Mollie's like, let's get some dirt.
Let's get some dirt. I'm
Yeah.
ready for the dirt. I'm ready for Chris Denman's autobiography. It's fine.
It's bad
But
news.
bad news. What I really appreciate about you is that you've really built, a really fantastic following. I love all at least I've seen you've been branching out. You've got like a happy hour now. You've got like We Are Live on different dates and everything. And I love all the guests that you bring on. Everybody's really interesting, whether they're local, whether they're national people visiting our city. You really give St. Louis a foundation about what is going on in their area, which is great. So was this something that you always wanted to do? Was this something that you fell into? How did you kind of get into the broadcasting arena?
Yeah,
what path?
it's honestly, it's pretty crazy. Like I worked, I went to school, and like I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I worked at a brewery, and like I loved the independence of that. Like it's this brewery in Columbia, Missouri that started when there really were no brew pubs and all that stuff, and somehow they made it through. And then I started working there right whenever craft beer kind of blew up. So I ended up working there like 5 years, and then eventually it was like, I'm bartending and managing in a college town, and it's super fun. But I kind of was like, all right, I guess I'll get into sales. And I took pretty naturally to that, and did well enough. I can see that. Yeah, sure. And did well enough, and did enough to where you move up and then you get other opportunities. And I was working for a company based in Houston, but I'd moved to Kansas City. So I'd fly down there like once a month, and then I would work remote most of the time. And I was always listening to podcasts. That was always just something I was into, just like weird, like talk radio. And I've always been into comedy stuff. And like 2009, I really got into listening to podcasts. Adam Carolla jumped over whenever he left CBS Radio. Got into Marin around the same time because Carolla was talking about Marin's Gallagher interview. And I was like, I need to check this guy out. Oh, I remember him from Conan. Joe Rogan was kicking things off back then. So that was kind of a thing. But I also used to listen to Loveline with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla. It was this nationally syndicated radio show that was super entertaining. Wow. Yeah, and they'd have bands on, and it was based on K-Rock in L.A. So that's probably where it was. And I listened to like Bob and Tom when I was a kid with my dad too. For sure. So the actual business of getting into broadcasting, I was listening to this, I listened to Adam Carolla, and I would always just pay attention to like the business stuff they would talk about. And I was like, oh, that's how they do that. That's how they do that. And I had started my own kind of outsourced sales and marketing company and doing new business development for like tech companies. And I'm like, ugh, this is awful and I hate it. But I was at least kind of working for myself, because if you're in sales, even if you're an executive vice president, like you're only as good as like the person ahead of you, and like your numbers and all that stuff. Nobody cares about you. So that got pretty old after a sales career, and I was looking and I was listening to Carolla all the time, and I was just thinking podcasts was super interesting, and it was growing and growing and growing, and I just saw it as something that was cool. Flash forward a little bit, I moved back to St. Louis. I'm listening to there's a radio show called The Morning After. It's on 590 now. At the time, it's been through something. It's really super successful for the level it is, and I would always pay attention to that. I'm like, oh, they've kind of got like a podcast feel to this AM morning radio show, because the guy who runs it, Tim McKernan's like obviously and speaks out about being a Howard Stern fan. So Howard Stern, somebody I listen to. But let's wrap this up. But basically,
this is great.
I thought it was interesting, but I was 30 at the time, and I always joked around and goofed around. I was like, I do a podcast or some kind of stand up. And I always talked about like, I should go do comedy, whatever. Basically out of fear or out of like some form of practicality, I was like, I talked to Travis, who started We Are Live with me, and I was like, hey, we should actually do a podcast, but nobody's coming to my living room that I actually want to talk to, and nobody's taking it serious. We're nobodies. So much truth in that. And on top of that, I had like seen people and interacted with people at this time that were doing it, and I was like, okay, maybe there's a smaller version of that, and I can help grow it. And I figured out, I was like, okay, I could sell advertising if I was part of a radio show, right? So I got together with Travis, and we had this idea, and we kind of put it together, and I was like, I bet I can sell advertising for this thing that's on CBS radio. We had never done radio. We went and started practicing in the public library, putting this thing together, and before we ever had a show, we had sponsors. Yes. And like our first 5 or 6 guests, like we did not deserve the guests that we had, and it was all because I wrote emails for my sales work, right? Like I wrote emails, I knew how to do stuff, and I knew how to put the right people together. So we got a shot, and we paid for time in the evenings on, it was at the time CBS Sports 920, but it was a CBS. There was CBS on that. That's got credibility. And that's kind of how we kicked things off. And then it just kind of, it's had its ups and downs since, but there's been some sort of forward momentum the whole time. And that was not quite, I think 5 years will be in October. Gotcha. So that was, so that's just kind of the general overview, and I'm trying not to be too boring about it, but that's what led me to it.
Great. I like hearing the buildup of it, just because I feel like a lot of people get a little nervous to talk about that, which is why, you've seen me do stuff here. Like, I like hearing how people got to where they are, because it's never easy. It's always work. Like, I feel like, like a lot of people, we kind of talked about this with Rafe, and, we talked about like how some people are just about the fame and not about the craft and what they're doing, But what I think about you is that, you're getting all these sponsors, you're doing all these things, you're doing all this development work. How do you feel that the growth has been from the beginning until now? Are you happy with the way things have gone?
Yeah, for sure. So, we made changes along the way. There have been some huge ups and massive downs. Like, it's scary. And that's what, like, it's weird being brought, like, within 6 months of being on the radio, like our evening radio show, like had better numbers than like the afternoon shows and stuff. We had interesting people coming on. It was cool. But what I learned and what I kind of knew from sales already was if you don't have advertising, you don't have a show. And that's what like journalism, you're a journalism student. Like you weren't taught that. I'm sure of it. Everybody thinks their perspective means something. I didn't go to school for journalism. I didn't graduate for journalism or anything. And it's one of those things where I guess it was a weird thing. I could talk well enough, and I had this weird, obsession with interviewing and all that other stuff. So it kind of worked out. But yeah, for where we're at right now, it's still a huge uphill battle, and I've made major changes to how I operate and how I've surrounded myself with really good people. They've surrounded me, whatever you want to say or however you want to put it, with Midcoast Media. Yeah, so it's not just, I didn't, like, radio's weird. Like, I had to ask myself, like, in St. Louis, there's a huge FM morning show. What are they? Rizzuto. And I remember just saying straight up, like, do you want to be Rizzuto? Like, that's not what you want to do. Like, you want to maybe look into more like creative things. Like, I don't have time to go do stand-up 6 nights a week and get good at that. That's not happening. So the production of things, putting things together, coming up with concepts, live events, things like that, where I can still flex a little bit of creativity, but really my skill set's in like putting that together. And along the way, I think I got pretty okay at interviewing people. So that's entertaining itself. So I don't know. Yes, I'm super happy, and I'm super lucky to be surrounded by really, really sound business professionals now with Midcoast Media. We're super strict about how we do things. So it's something you have to learn, and you learn it the hard way too. And it's been like several times where you're just like, maybe this will keep going tomorrow. I don't know. But now where we're at, sans pandemic, Right? I'm just really really lucky that we have the studio and that we have some opportunities, and I don't know, some really smart people support us. So that's a really
Yeah.
positive thing, right?
Well, totally. Well, I love working with you, so
Yeah,
that's an opinion right there that we all need.
that's all we
What
need.
I will-
That's right.
all we need is what Mollie's thinking. What I will say too is that you're also known for you also now does Midcoast they're a part of the shows that you produce like down in Sophie's or
Anything. So now
at the barbecue place.
Yeah. So now anything we do, so we had the really fun Southtown Pub comedy show before that went away. We did the Sophie's Happiest Hour series, which was like kind of a weird concept, but it ended up working and it was growing, and
Yeah.
people were like, the folks here at the Kransberg Arts Foundation were excited. They were extending it. We were going to keep pushing forward and kind of figuring out like best uses for it. It was an early comedy show, which was a weird concept anyway, but yeah, so anything that we do or We Are Live does, Midcoast is backing that. So We Are Live
Sure.
is part of Midcoast. So yeah, anything we do. And we had aspirations for bigger shows and stuff too, that now we're like, I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I feel like that's what everybody's going through is that, I even had kind of like a timeline of things I wanted to talk about. I had talked to you about doing like a live Casually Molly show and whatnot. And a lot has been kind of just put on hold for right now. And I feel like anybody, especially people who are like us or around there in the creative world, are starting to come up with like alternative ways, to make work happen and do things.
Yeah,
So I'm I'm very grateful that we have, VMix here to do stuff with, which is awesome.
Right.
And I know a lot of people are pushing into the virtual world as well. What I will ask you is, you do Facebook, you've got YouTube, you've got all these things. Between all the networks that you've been doing, who has been one of your favorite guests that you've interviewed, if you don't mind sharing? Yeah. I mean, not to offend anybody that may not be the favorite, but
whatever. Like anybody cares. Like anybody cares. Here's what happens. No one cares until they see something directly in front of their face that they want. And they're like, hey, why didn't you do that with me? I'm like, I don't know. Why didn't you subscribe? Why didn't you hit share? Why didn't you review the show till it helped you? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, it pops out. So I mentioned, I'll just be a coward about it and mention a few.
Okay.
and if you
Here
put
we
a gun to
go.
my head. Yeah, right. So when we first started out, we got to do some interviews we shouldn't have got to do because I knew how to ask. And the first time I interviewed Adam Carolla on the phone, I was like, holy cow, we've done it, by God. And that actually ended up leading to us getting to do like a big live show with him at the pageant. It was like crazy. So that was like a big one. And at that point, I was literally like, oh, I can just stop now. Like, this is all I really wanted to do, was like be on the level with this guy. But no, so I'd always remember that. But like Jake the Snake actually pops out, the wrestler from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
He got really, really introspective. He's a guy who's gotten sober, kind of fixed his life after some horrific things happened. We did a phone interview with him on the radio show that really sticks out. Boy, there's one that sticks out too. My friend Lorenzo Williams played football at the University of Missouri, played in the NFL for a bit. During I don't know, do you remember whenever there were protests at Mizzou?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was really like divisive, right? It's like black players supporting this and all that, whatever. So it was myself, Travis, and Lorenzo. We just had a conversation. Ended up making it to the New York Times, and we were
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
and we'd been on the radio for 3 months at that point.
Yeah.
So I was like, holy cow, people are whoa, this is crazy. So that sticks out, but like, man, it's really honestly, it's super tough to kind of isolate one. You connect with people and you have these great conversations, and it's like, okay, well, is it great because you developed a relationship with the person afterwards, right? Like you can still count on each other, do all those things. In the moment, there's so many of them at this point. Like we did a show for 3 hours a day for 3 years on the radio, and then plus podcasts and all these other things. There's a bunch that are really, it's just really tough to do that. But Jake the Snake always stands out, and that's a really weird one too, because whenever you have somebody's action figure when you're a child, you having like a really meaningful, heartfelt conversation with them is interesting too. It's a weird
Yeah.
place to be. So yeah,
It's
I
kind
don't
of
know.
cool though. Yeah, it's like world circle. That's it. Everything comes full circle. Excuse me.
It's all right. You've been hammered since you got off work, I'm sure.
I know everybody I was actually talking about that today because everybody when I'm giggling, we talked about this laughing and giggling,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody called and they were making they were canceling a reservation at the hotel and they were like, yeah, when I laugh, people just think that I'm just drunk all the time, I guess. And I was like, ma'am, I can't even default you for telling me this on the phone because I too have that issue sometimes. So it's
That's so
okay.
funny. Yeah. Man, and
It's
that,
right.
gosh, this is so tough too. Like going back on this, like trying to think about. We did an interview with Tim Meadows from Saturday Night
Oh,
Live,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
like that sticks out because he had done 4 or 5 interviews. So a lot of times you get people that come in and they're just like, another conversation with somebody's going to ask me a bunch of dumb questions.
Sure.
Tim was super
Mhm.
thoughtful, and he was like, and he paused after we were done off camera and everything. He was like, it was really good. And he was like just very earnest about it. I'm like, yeah. So that's up there too. But yeah, there's quite a few, but great question.
I love all of these. No, I always ask that just because I feel like everybody has different interviewing styles. Everybody has different not purposes, but I guess different avenues they want their podcast to go down. So it's always interesting if I see somebody that has a podcast. I always like to ask them who have you liked having on,
Yeah.
what I'll ask you too is what is something that here's the thing, especially we're in quarantine, that's a joke that goes around on Facebook, Instagram, all of that. Everybody's starting a podcast, right? So for those of people who are even just genuinely interested, which is true, what is some advice that you could maybe pass forward to people who want to kind of get into that, broadcasting it, growing it? I know it's kind of a general question, but what is something at the top of your head that you think people should know?
Just number one, and this is it seems so simple, but nobody follows it. Just try and have some semblance of consistency. And I mean,
Yeah.
listen, that doesn't mean you flip shit if it's an hour late to getting posted, but keep it within a day. Keep it within, if you're doing something and you're building it, make people, we're all habitual, right? And you're up against this is just like comedy. I always feel bad for you stand-ups where you're not getting judged against their coworkers, which are infinitely less funny or skilled than any starting stand-up comic. You're judged that they saw Dave Chappelle on Netflix and they think it's the same fucking thing. So, so
Right.
with
Yeah.
podcasts, if you're doing the same thing, you have to at least just do what you can to control consistency. And then it doesn't have to be perfect, but just as someone who we had a studio and our equipment wasn't performing up to its capability until recently. And that's fine. That happens. It doesn't have to be perfect. But listening experience, if you have a long form podcast, people are standing around listening to you just talk. So if you're into the mic, if you're making noise, if you're clanking glasses, people don't like that. So just know what you're trying to do and then be consistent with it.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of sometimes people are talking about formatting or free form. So I appreciate you hitting the nail on the head with that.
Well, there's
You
no
talked about,
perfect way
yeah,
too.
yeah, that's the thing.
Your show has changed. You get better. You add things in, you come up with that. So there's evolution to it and there's always going to be that, but yeah, if you can just kind of figure out and make sure you enjoy it. That's super easy here. We change things up to where it's just kind of me hosting the show now, and we were doing 2 hours a day with a producer that was a huge part of it. I'm still great friends with Chris and Travis.
Oh,
And
of course, yeah.
but towards the end, there was no doubt that we were all just kind of this is a lot. And it wasn't something that everyone was super passionate about anymore. So you make changes.
You make lots of things, and I love that I love that you hit on evolution of things because I feel formatting things always changes. Your semblance and the way you put things together have always changed. Do you have any? I mean, you just talked about some changes that you made now, but we are in quarantine. We are kind of again, we touched on changing things in a virtual format. Do you have any exciting things that are coming up on We Are Live that you want us to know about?
This will be out Sunday, so you'll have missed it, but you can go back and see it. I'm doing a live stream Saturday with my new pal Katie Tupin.
Oh, I love her.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
she's
follow her on
talented.
Instagram. Yeah.
Good.
I
She's
do.
she's a talented musician. That I'm laugh at her. I'm like so we've become buddies through all this. She's been on the show before, but then that was more just like interviewer, and then but we've become buddies. And she's been on Letterman, and I'm like. Like,
No
what?
big deal.
Yeah, whatever. No, she's great, but no, we're doing a thing with her. And then a comedian who's been on Corden, Lisa Best, is like one of her really good friends. And we're going to do just like a live stream podcast this Saturday. As far as like bigger things, like I've really enjoyed, and I've always wanted to do this, but I just find musicians' management to be really annoying to deal with a lot of times as compared to comics who their management are like, okay, get out there, do these interviews. So we've been doing the virtual happy hour every Thursday, and as part of that, we made it just like a more of a variety show style of thing where you make cocktails. I was like, of course, I'm going to interview an interesting guest, and then we have a musical guest. So that's kind of sparked up some interest with me. So I'll just say this: I'm looking at a regular weekly like virtual interview. We did this with the singer from Future Birds a few weeks ago, where I just interviewed him and he played like 4 songs and it was fantastic. So I'd like to get more into that, and I want to handpick the artists, and I want it to still be like a cool, relaxed feel. Like I don't want it to be radio-y. I'm not trying to do that, but if you can have people that are, not all musicians are interesting. That's another part too. Like at least comics can fake being interesting. A lot of musicians just kind of like look tough on a mic, and they've got good vocals. That doesn't mean that they're good interviews. So I think soon we'll have some pretty cool news in regards to a weekly feature on We Are Live as far as musicians go. So that's really fun for me anyways.
Yeah, no, it does sound exciting. I didn't even think of like, kind of like interviewing different people and, seeing kind of like who's got a handle on it and whatnot. But I love the idea of virtual happy hour. Like, I think that's a really, really good idea.
It's cool. It's the power of calling something by a name. Like, listen, we make drinks, we chat, and then we have a comedic guest usually. Or like yesterday, we had Stephen Hale from Schlafly. Wonderful interview, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry I missed it. I'm going to have to watch it.
Oh, my gosh. Dude, really a very good interview. And I was like, Stephen, you're doing it right. And then you have music, which to me, I don't know if I'm lazy or lacking self-confidence or what, but I'm like, that's just a podcast. Like, what is that? Why do we, whatever. But you call it a virtual happy hour. You're deliberate in the fact that you make cocktails. You switch it up. It's a little more fast-paced, built for a stream. And it's not just a podcast. I'm wrong. But to me, I'm just like, no, it's almost like, it's like kind of a modern day variety show. And it's something that is a little longer form. If it was on, network TV, it would be 22 minutes long and really chopped up. But we get to talk. There's still a longer form conversation, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. So if I can keep doing things like that people actually care about and it grows, then I'm not sure what else I would want, Like that's the goal.
It sounds like you got some great goals going on. Do you have we talked about your good stories, who you've been interviewing, what we have coming up. Did you ever have kind of like a crazy story? You don't have to mention names, but
I'll drop names.
Did you ever have any interviews where something maybe didn't go quite as planned? We all have a podcast guest where maybe things didn't go, or a radio guest, or maybe something happened while you were live. What's something that you've had to kind of like handle just in the moment that you didn't, you didn't think it was going to happen in the first place, but we all have it. It happens.
The funniest one, and I'm forgetting his name. Oh my gosh, he's crazy. He's a baseball player for the Phillies, and Lenny Dykstra. Like if you look him up, like he's an insane person. Like he's and I say that he's got issues. I once filled in on a morning show on the morning after. It was myself, Travis Terrell, and Doug Vaughn, who's on KMOV, and then he's a co-anchor on this morning show. And we had Lenny Dykstra on. I guess he had a book out or something. And he's scammed people out of money. He's been known to do a lot of cocaine, drugs, all this stuff. And he was totally out of it sounding. blah, 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 on the interview, and it's 7:40 a.m. in Central Time, and I go, and I was like, I'll handle this. I'll bring it back around. I'll be
Sure.
Mr. Charming here. So I go, Lenny, I have no idea, and I didn't prep this or anything else. I was like, hey, I have no idea if you're even aware of this, but the age I grew up watching a show called Boy Meets World, and you were one of the characters were obsessed with you. They were always excited. Was this ever brought to your attention? And do you find, what did that mean to you? He goes, what? He's like, losing. He's like I was an idiot for asking it. And Doug and Travis just like look at me like, what you got, partner? And I just go, and I bail, and I just go, the book, and I plugged his book and got him off the phone. And yeah, that was me trying to tightrope walk and be Mr. Cool, and it worked out. But that happened, and then I had something that I actually had to cut from an interview that I recovered from. Okay, I had made a mistake about who a comic dated, and the comic was a woman, and she dated a woman that I still argue looks very much like another woman. But it looked really shitty because it was coming from me. I'm like, oh, do all women comics who date other women look the same? So there was that, and then just the worst is technical issues, because that's just like super frustrating, but it's something you deal with. But yeah, there's been issues like that. But I remember a comic came on one time and didn't break character from something I didn't find to be very funny, and it went on for like 27 minutes instead of like
that's awkward.
7. That sucked. Yeah, and I liked the comic too, but it was just terrible radio.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I mean, there was one comic. I always say this, like, because we have so many comics on. In like almost 5 years of interviewing comics, like, there have been 2 that I've been displeased with. That's really good when you interview a bunch.
Yeah.
But that guy was kind of pouty, and I was like, that wasn't the best, but it still wasn't terrible, and he wasn't mean. And then he came back, and it was Tony Hinchcliffe. And he came on, and he came back on the show, and it was just me and him one-on-one. And I was like, oh, we're like best buddies now. That was great. So, always be aware of what's going on with other people too. Who knows? Maybe he was supposed to be in this hotel. But yeah, those are some memories.
Yeah. Oh, I love those stories. I think I feel, because, I've been, me, I have a theater background, and there was definitely times where, like, just like when you're on live and you're behind the microphone, when you're on stage and you're trying to do stuff,
Yeah.
you get kind of caught off guard. Things happen. When I was directing, I remember one time I was directing a show, and we did it. I think I told you about this. It was a play called Old Wounds in the Moonrise Hotel, and the Betty Grable suite was very cool. So I packed like 25 people in a room, and it like looked over the city, which was kind of awesome. But one night I oversold too many tickets. So I had like maybe 35, 40 people in this tiny suite. It ended up working out because these are all like theater artists. So
Right.
like, and I mean, I say it as a joke, like we're like, oh, we'll just sit on the wall. We'll sit on the mantle. We'll sit on the couch. Like
Right.
we don't care. But it was hilarious because poor Kara, she comes in to do what we did was we had her preset on the bed. So people would be hanging up their jackets and stuff, and she's just like sitting there reading. So she was maybe just expecting like a small audience. She comes out and like everybody's on top of each other. It was like getting to the point where, so like this one lady was like pregnant, and she goes, oh, I'm part of the show. Like right as the show starts.
Fun.
And it's a drama. So she just like has her legs out. She's like, I gotta tell my husband, like, I'm like 8 months pregnant and at a play, and like, go me. And she was having the time of her life.
Good for
like,
her.
I mean,
Good for her.
Like, I was so happy. It was hilarious, but it wasn't, I mean, it's not like a bad story by any means, but like, here I have these ladies just in the front, just memorable. And like, anytime they were having like, a dramatic meeting basically, because they both like were remarried, and then this was like a dinner to kind of like put closure to certain things. So anytime like Brian would say something or Kara would say something, all these ladies were like, wait, what? How is this? And like the table's right here. But you know what? They had a great time. We had snack and hors d'oeuvres in the front. So
that's awesome.
What are you going to do about it? So
have you host a lot of comedy shows, and you're a professional. You're a theater. I was thinking of something else because you get into these conversations and sometimes you just get guests loaded in that you don't really want to have on, but it is what it is, and you're like, well, it'll kill some time. Have you ever forgotten, whether it be on stage or something else, have you ever forgotten somebody's name?
Oh, so I haven't had that like I've never had that horror when hosting,
Mm,
thankfully. Now I will say I hosted a piano competition once, small world.
mm,
Got paid to do that,
nice.
and everybody was from all over the world, which was fantastic. But like the problem was I kept mispronouncing. I was like, "What is it? What's the name of it?"
Yeah.
And then I would study it, remember it, and then I would get out there and be like, "Oh my god!" And then like luckily I would click onto it, but I've never had, thankfully. Now I say this, I said something like this the last time I was on a podcast talking about Casually Molly, and then it ended up happening. So now I'm going to be sitting here with you saying, oh, I've never had a problem with people's names. And like every time I host, it's just perfect.
It'll
And
happen. I think it's
it'll
just more like
happen.
just roll with it, but it did suck.
Yeah.
Like the on stage, like whatever, you bring somebody up and it is what it is.
Yeah.
But you
Mhm.
during an interview and you know you've got 15, 20 more minutes left with them and you just like straight up blank, like that was not fun. So do your
Oh,
homework. Do
dang.
your homework.
I was about to say, I was like, I can't even imagine, Chris. Like, what I will give to you is you're very smooth when you interview. So if you ever had an issue, I would have never known. So good
Yeah,
job.
thank you. I thank you for the compliment. Yeah, it is. There's just no point in giving in to that situation because the people that are watching care, so they're going to be along for the ride with you, and enough people that are able to tune into a podcast or a video stream, like they're familiar with the
Mhm.
idea that this isn't network TV and
Yeah.
things can happen. So there's no point in freaking out about it. So you have to roll with it or tank the whole thing, throw a fit, go ahead. Maybe that'll work for you, but I just think that it makes sense to just roll with it.
Like, I don't think I blank necessarily on on names, but I do blank on like if I have a thought, I'll be like going on a long
Mm.
tangent and then I get stuck in the middle of the thought and I'm like, I'm so sorry. Where was I going with this?
It
I have no
happens.
idea.
I've tried
But
to.
people say that happens, so
No, it does, and it's one of those things. If you talk enough, that you'll realize like it's a habit, just like anything else, and
yeah.
you can get rid of it. Like that. I jokingly, like with Travis and I, we had this thing where it's like, well, me interrupting him is part of the bit, right? Like that's just I'm gonna jump in fast. But then you realize you're always interrupting, and it's not good, and it's not fun. So you change it up, and you try and be a little more, I guess, thoughtful about how you talk and do those things. So yeah, and that could be a thing too. Recently, I've been saying love that or appreciate that too much. Well, so I got to delete that. You know what I mean? Like you have these phrases
Love
that you always
that.
lean on. Not like that, you asshole.
Now I just really want to hear you say love that because that like you know how we have that thing where we set those gifts and you're like I'm dead inside and I have like the coffee mug. I'm like good morning, I'm ready. So now I just really want to hear you happily go love that.
It's a crutch. It's the same thing as like whenever somebody does something where you're just like, oh my gosh. I caught myself saying it like 3 times a show, going like, I appreciate that about you. And it's kind of funny in the right situation, but then you're also like, that's the third time you've said that. Stop it.
Right. I know.
Use your
My
words.
crutch is precisely like I'm like precisely,
It
right?
happens. It does. It
And I'm like,
absolutely
who
happens.
talks like this? Like, what am I in the Victorian era? Like, precisely. Like, I don't even know. Like, I'm done. Now, I will say, now I don't know how you are. Like, how do your friends? Why I bring this up? There's like a reason. This is going to be kind of a not a strange question, but like kind of random. So for your friends who aren't as familiar with the creative or like production scene the way you are, what do they think about you having a podcast? How do they feel about it?
I think most don't know like what's going on. Like they're like you
Mhm.
pop up on this happened. One of my childhood friends. I talked to him the other day, and he's super busy. He owns like a bunch of Domino's franchises, and he has a family and all this stuff. And he's into comedy and like podcasts and stuff like that. So it's not out of the realm for him to listen to stuff. But he hasn't been able to
Yeah.
tune in. And
Mhm.
he hasn't caught up. Midcoast Media is like a little over a year old. There's way more to what we do than just me jumping on. He's like, I don't know what you do. I just see you on Facebook sometimes talking to funny people. I'm like, that's a fair assessment. Like,
Yeah.
okay. So like my closest friends, I think they think it's cool. I would say like the majority of people think it's probably horseshit. Like they probably think like, look at this fucking idiot. Like, what's he doing with his life? Like, that's probably what people think, because I don't expect them to know everything that's going on. Like, you see me, goofing around for an hour or whatever else, but then you don't see me like emailing sponsors, having meetings, dealing with all kinds of different stuff. So it's just kind of like everything. It's just a little more noticeable because we'll have Sinbad in, right? And
Yeah.
you're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, okay, so like, are you a comic now? Like, no. Okay. Like, people don't understand, like normal people that like go clock in don't always think that there's a process to things like, oh, cool. So you host like a show at a bar. Well, yeah. And brand sponsor and comics, make a little money from it and it grows and you do this and that. So, yeah, if I had to guess, I would think that most people are like, oh, he does the thing. And, probably not much else. Like, that's what I would probably think that people would think of me. And the reason I think that is because even at the highest levels, you see it happen. Like, I was just joking, laughing about my friend Katie doing Letterman. She was part of a #1 hit, a Billboard #1 hit. Or like comics. My friend Ian was on Last Comic Standing. He's been in movies. He's one of the funniest people on the planet. Like Bill Burr. It's like, I don't know if I want to follow that guy. They're just like, what have you done for me lately, and what have you done for me like right now? So people are really strange, but that's probably a very negative way that I'm thinking people think of me. But
Well, the only reason I brought that up was because I was talking about this the other day with my mom, actually, who loves you, by the way.
I love her.
She loved the stream. She's like, Chris is so nice. I can't wait to meet him in person. And I was
I love
all right,
that. I have a
Mom.
great relationship with my parents and family too. So like, I love that, and
Yeah.
I'm sure your mom's a delight. So we'll have to have non-quarantine drinks whenever she comes down.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. Like, since I can't go back to Cincinnati, like, and they're not really
Ever.
computer literate. Yeah. Like, ever. Like, for the longest time, I'm like, sorry, guys. And my
Right.
mom's like,
Has nothing
I'll
to do with
holler and be like,
quarantine.
how's everything? No, just can't.
Just can't.
Just don't even
And I
feel
won't
like
talk
going,
about it.
really.
And I won't talk about it. So stop
I don't
asking.
have feelings, okay? Like, I need to just be at home by myself and just look at these walls and think about it. But yeah, no, like, and I don't know how you grew up. Like, I think I maybe told you this. I was from a blended family, and most people were in sports, and they had kind of like careers and like regular jobs. And I was like that weird kid that came later in life. And it's not that my siblings were upset by any means, but I was always just doing like artistic things. And when I started doing comedy, everybody's like, oh, Mollie's just like trying something. Like, who knows where this is going to go? And then when I started doing podcasting, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. And I think that kind of transcended over to my family and friends. They're like, well, what do you mean? Like, you can't go out and do something? I'm like, well, I'm just working on my podcast tonight, trying to get it on streaming services, which for me, I'm sure for you, it didn't take very long. But for me, I was like sitting by myself in my apartment and I'm like, why won't iTunes accept my feed? Like,
Mollie, like you got started podcasting. Like, I started with a radio show that was part of a radio station that, and I'm not dogging them for this, but like, that's why I try and be helpful with people that come to Midcoast and use our studio and things like that. And no one told me like, hey, you should do this. Hey, you should do that. They're like, good luck. Like, pay the bill and good luck. So no, I for sure did that. I told like, practice in the public library. And I remember the guy, they have a really good media center. I lived downtown at the time. They have a really good media center. I remember the guy running it. He's like, you guys are like good. And I was like, yeah, I sure hope so. And he was like, oh, he was like, why? And good is a very relative term for whatever. But he was like, oh, why do you say we better be? I'm like, oh, we start on CBS radio next week.
Right. So we better be good at what we're doing right now.
Yeah. Which, man, when we first started, we were so bad. And then you could still argue that it's not that great. But
well, I think, I'm a fan. I actually like the interviews just because I like kind of like listening to people's stories. I've always been somebody that's interested in human interest pieces.
same.
But I totally get what you're saying when people are just like, oh, that's nice. Like, you just like talk to people and they think it's super easy. And then now I'm starting to have people be messaging me, just like people who just want to start podcasts, just whether it's for, and I'm obviously no expert, but they'll be like, oh my God, how do you get on streaming services? This is difficult. And I'm like, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And you want to be helpful too, but like there's
Mhm.
also like when I talk to you about it, like you're taking notes, you have plans, you obviously enjoy it, like you're serious about it. And that's the difference. And it's one of those things where it's like this can be something you do with your phone at home where you rate TV dinners.
Mhm.
Like that's a podcast too. Or you can put a little more effort into it and your hobby can be something you make money off of, right? So that's what I
Totally.
kind of try and tell people that come in here. I'm just like, listen, people are interested enough. If your content's good enough and you approach people the right way and you don't ask for much money, you might be able to get sponsored. So there's something to
Yeah,
having structure to a creative endeavor like podcasting that
exactly.
people will support. So.
Yeah, I love that. And that makes me feel happy. What I will ask you at the end is what's one of your plans to help survive quarantine other than podcasting? What else
Hmm.
what else
Not
do you plan? I know we kind of talked about listening to podcasts, but
not
have you been
sleeping.
inspired to do anything? Not sleeping. There you
Yeah,
go.
it's terrible. I
Oh
cut you
man.
off. Sorry. Go ahead.
That was it. I was just like, not sleeping. Have you been interested in maybe, I know a lot of people, and I mean, I can't really attest to this. I've read one book by Jen Kirkman that I've been wanting to finish and finally did. But
Oh,
is
I
there
need to
anything
read
just
more.
on the horizon? Yeah, I try. My best friend Dana in Tennessee does a lot of like audiobooks. And so
Mm-hmm.
people tell me like it's kind of like, because I'm in the situation as you where I'll work all day and then, you're at home like doing certain things, and you also have your dogs, which is very
Absolutely.
cute. I got to meet them. But yeah, like audiobooks and stuff. Do you ever see yourself maybe doing something like that?
Like putting one out.
Uh, you could, yeah. I was about to say, like, would you be interested? Like, do you do one
I don't know.
with
Like
We Are Live? Are you going to do an audiobook about your biography or
maybe I
your
should
autobiography?
maybe I should accomplish something worthwhile before that happens. But
I
it's
love that. I was about to say that. Absolutely.
that's funny. That's so funny. No, I have honestly like when I say like I'm working Saturday and that'll be precluded by thing like I'm so lucky to be so busy right now and to make these like just to make ends meet and everything. And we were already a small company which has a million hurdles itself. So I'll just say to not skirt your question, I'll say like cooking has been fun. I love cooking. I already did,
Yeah.
but like you put together something fun and then you get to do that. But no, I miss I like being able to hang out with my family. I haven't been able to do that. They only live like an hour
Yeah.
away. So I would love if I could say this happens, say this goes till fall, right? Like
Yeah.
this weird balance that we're in right now. I need to, and I feel like I've been saying this for 5 years. At times in my life, I mean, I played sports and did like martial arts and stuff like that. At times, I've been in extremely good shape, and I love being in good shape. I really do. I feel better. I love outdoor activities, playing sports. Like I played basketball for so long, and
Mhm.
I need to tighten up the diet, and like that needs to be my focus. Like I can read books and all that other stuff, but when you get busy, it's so easy to fall back on it. So that's my goal, but it's been my goal for 5 years. So, and it's and it's when you're tall too. I'm like a bigger guy. Like I can pack on weight, but I can lose it really fast too. So I think
Mhm.
in my head, I'm like, oh, you'll pick it up. You'll be fine. So I
Well,
need
there's
to.
always karate. There you
Great,
go.
good thinking. No, I think yeah, focusing on that. But yeah, I've just been so consumed by everything that I haven't done anything kind of fun like quirky quarantini because I'm literally like just waking up, dealing with my dogs, coming here, falling asleep, and yeah,
You haven't become a master chef. What's wrong with you?
I'm
Make a
already a
crock
master
pot
chef.
recipe and put it on. Okay.
Oh my
I always get in
gosh.
trouble with that. That's one thing we can end this, but I Jimmy always laughs because I own a crock pot. Okay, I
Oh,
have nothing against crock
ooh,
pot. Right,
ooh.
exactly. So I don't want anybody that's watching this to be like, wow, like she hates crock pots or something. When I usually have a bajillion things a day, I'll put something in the crock pot. But what always annoys me is when I meet somebody and they're like, oh, I have a bunch of crock pot recipes if you want to try them. And I'm like, and like Jimmy can like feel it from the side of me, like, and then like social Molly, I'm just like, yeah, have a great day. And my girlfriends are like, what do you have against crockpot recipes? I'm like, I don't have anything against them. I'm against the people who do them that make themselves sound like they're Gordon Ramsay. You know what I mean?
You dumped a bunch of things in a bucket.
Exactly. I'm like, what? Like I think I said something once to like on Instagram, and I was like, look, like have fun with your cauldron, but I just like made this dinner old school style. Okay. I didn't need any help. I didn't need any of this, but, I know in quarantine, everybody's like suddenly becoming like a master of something. So I don't know. Maybe that's going to be another. They think that they are, though.
They're doing it.
They mostly are.
They're doing it for social media credit, and so their aunt thinks that they're staying busy. That's all they're doing it.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, totally. I've probably how my mom looks when she sees this podcast. She's like, "Oh, she's keeping busy."
Yeah, my mom too. She's like, you weren't drinking during Casually Molly, were you? No.
And I'm like, oh, I had a little, but it's all right. There wasn't really that much, to be honest with you. So I have to save some. But where can, now that we've chatted, where are some of the best places that we can find Chris Denman? Because you have like 5 different social media pages, as I recalled from when we try to do our live streams.
There's a lot going on. Yeah. Tune in every Thursday at 4:00 for now. We're doing that virtual happy hour. That's super fun. But the best thing you can do is subscribe on iTunes, rate, review us, do all that good stuff. 5 stars only. Come on.
Nice. Only 5 stars.
Right. But yeah, support us that way. And if you see somebody sponsoring us, buy their products. That helps and help out people like Molly and our other podcasts. And it's all one big happy family. So yeah.
Yes, that's one thing I like, not to interrupt you precisely, but that's one thing I do love about all of this. Like, I feel like on a sentimental note, I feel like our friendship has grown, Denman,
absolutely,
which is great. So I'm so happy that I get to record with you and do all these cool things. Speaking of cool things, if you could be casually cool and subscribe to the Casually Molly podcast.
I've rated the Casually Molly podcast.
You did. I rated you too, so don't worry. We did a mutual rate. Keep rating us, and we also have a YouTube channel now too.
Nice.
I know a lot of people have streamed or have shared the live stream with Rafe, which is fantastic. But you can also find 3 of the other episodes on YouTube as well. And I can't wait. Chris, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do now? What's your plan?
I've got to run a trivia live stream for the George Remus King of the Bootleggers, which you were such an amazing guest on. You did wonderfully, and I got so many compliments. I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna help with another podcast at our studio after this. So I should be home around 8:30. Yeah.
Oh, well, have fun. I'll let you go and get all your work done. But thanks again for sitting with me and spending your Friday afternoon with me. That's great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Molly. Keep up the great work.